ACP, Activist Community Podcast Network, reports on issues and concerns affecting local and global communities. If you would like to talk about current issues in Albuquerque or New Mexico, or if you represent an activist group and want to further your cause or promote your group's events, email or call Tom Dent at tnldent4@msn.com or call 505-450-1268. We promote progressive grassroots efforts to lift all people and communities to a place of equality, respect, compassion, and care. And we're at the Peace Center today. Tom and I will be doing another Stream of Consciousness show. Tom, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Lloyd. It is great to be alive in this daring and exciting age.
It is. It's a wonderful day to be alive. Taking breaths of the semi-fresh air.
A little polluted by all the tourists in town for the Albuquerque International Balloon Fiesta, and I don't think the balloons went up today, but they were amazing yesterday. It is very nice outside. It's supposed to get cold tonight. Could be the first freeze of the season. It's supposed to be 30 degrees, and the high should be 50 tomorrow, but the air and the views and everything are very exciting up here at almost a mile high in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
We love New Mexico.
We totally love New Mexico. I'm a transplant, but I've been here long enough to say that come in and enjoy our beautiful scenery and mountains and Balloon Fiesta and food and crap millennial beer, because we're one Albuquerque, and go home and don't think about coming back here and settling, because we just have just enough water and just enough green chili for ourselves.
We have some problems we need to solve before we ask people to come here and live.
Oh, it's really, actually, if you knew what was going on, it's almost too dangerous to live here. It really is. Between the jet fuel plume, the medium to high level nuclear waste dump at Sandia Labs that doesn't even have a liner and it's covered with hard packed dirt, and water gets in there. Don't even consider relocating in Albuquerque.
All right. This anti-Chamber of Commerce moment brought to you by Activist Community Podcast Network.
It's not brought to you by Barclays Bank in Santolina. For those of you who don't know who Barclays Bank is, it's one of the 7 LIBOR banks that are 7 of the most powerful banks in the world. That I guess lately the Fed said that they would freely give standing loans to billions of dollars to. So debt, loan, funny money, fake magic, all this stuff is, debt slavery is fully sponsored. It's almost like, the old Lay's potato chips commercial, and I'm not advertising or proselytizing for any company whatsoever, but don't worry, we'll make more.
As I told you in the pre-production meeting, I have a little bombshell for you. Ooh. I read the calendar outside, the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice monthly calendar. We do not appear on the calendar. I'm not quite sure why we're here.
Ooh, heads are going to roll. We were supposed to interview the 2 new coordinators of the podcast, but one is on a special trip out of the state for a couple of months, and the other one is recuperating from her adventures in activism and wants to do her own private interview here, in addition to the 2 new co-coordinators of the Peace Center, talking about what's happening at the Peace Center, the changes that are made, activism in general, the different groups that are members here at the Peace Center. We're members, and as Lloyd probably told you, we meet here twice monthly, the second and fourth Thursday of the month at 1 o'clock. So if you're in the area, stop by. We'll interview anybody. And we're talking in the pre-production meeting that activism, the lack of activism training, activism in general, and with all the cut-off communications by the powers that be, I don't think not many people in this town know that we actually have any activists in this town anymore. But we're taking 2 steps back and gathering our energies and trying to make people aware that critical thinking is going on in this town, that as Lloyd was indicating, that there's a lot of problems to be addressed in this town and in the state, and in this country, and the world in general.
Well, we're working on that, slowly but surely.
Yeah, what we do need is a website and a way to direct people to the podcast as quickly as possible. What are we up on now, Lloyd? Are we up on Podbean or YouTube?
Right now we're on the Podbean platform. We also have a episode on SoundCloud.
Well, we're starting to move a little bit. A few interns from UNM in the Fine Arts Department that are looking for activities to do, and we may bring them in here and have them learn how to podcast and help Lloyd with his multitude of duties, activities here, and we'll probably turn around and interview them. We want to interview the ambassadors on the streets of Central.
Yeah, Charlie, if you hear this, Mr. Erasm, we're going to need those filmed. Those are YouTube worthy.
If you don't know who the ambassadors are, they're the people that the city hires to push a garbage can around and pick up the trash and make sure that things are neat and everything like that. But they're right there on the street, right there on the sidewalk. They know the pulse of the city. It'd be very interesting to get their ground floor perspective.
Well, I think it would be interesting to do it on Tuesdays and ask the ambassadors about some talking points from the previous evening's city council.
They're considering all sorts of interesting things with the city council. Bringing back the party patrol, spending $30,000 more on police activities that we really don't need, money that could be regenerated and moved to places where it's really needed. As we've indicated on other programs, the city doesn't really need more cops and to be spending more money. They need to know how to connect with the community, keep their guns in their holsters, and to clean up their garbage. They need their own ambassadors to dump some of these nefarious and murdering police officers off the force.
Well, okay.
We need to have a whole program on mental health issues.
All right, yeah.
Here in Albuquerque in our schools in Bernalillo County. There's on October the 11th, this Friday, there's a mental health first aid certification class, 5412 2nd Street Northwest. Bernalillo County has come up with a 16 to 19 point plan to take whatever it was, $50 million that we voted on a bond issue or a county question in the last election, or 2 elections ago. And some of the things it is trying to establish, I guess they've taken over a couple of floors at the old downtown jail, and they've supposedly made it into a way station where when people get dropped off from the Bernalillo County Detention Center, they say that they're dropping them off later, like 7 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning, rather than 3 or 4 in the morning, like they did before in front of the DA's office on Lomas. But they say that they now have change of clothes, and you can take a shower there and get a meal and use the phone to call somebody for a ride and stuff like that as you get reacclimated to society after being locked up for whatever specific amount of time. Another one of their initiatives is supposedly to shut down move the Turquoise Lodge from downtown to the old Lovelace Medical Center on Gibson, and to expand the MATS facility into the old Turquoise Lodge, and to actually do the required work that MAT is supposed to be with the recovering mentally ill, addicted, and alcoholic that are there to dry out. From what I've heard from some of my connections is that the MATS facility has about 60 beds, and nobody knows who's running the place between the state and the county and the city or whatever, but apparently the county says that they want to take more of a lead on this, and they have been discharging people almost, in some cases right away or within 3 to 6 weeks, which is nowhere near time to rehab and come out with a significant recovery and hopefully a promise of opportunity, a job, and a decent place to stay when you get out. Another thing that's interesting in their plan is it's called Youth in Transition, and it's a program that takes in the foster kids for 2 years after they turn 18. I don't know if many people know this here. I was a foster parent and I have an adopted daughter, but the foster programming here, if you're not claimed by a family by the time you're 18 or have an association with a family, they basically just put you out on the street. And the Youth in Transition, will house kids for 2 years while they teach them better life skills and get them secure in jobs and housing and some kind of community connection. And that's as you know, Lloyd, that's one of our major problems here is lack of connection. I mean, I groused a little bit about not being able to pin down activists in this town or people knowing about the activism that goes on here at the Peace Center and in other realms and different groups and organizations throughout this town. But connection to community, people having to work too hard, people that are in their groups thinking they run their groups, that their groups are the be-all, end-all, I don't know. There just needs to be I think we've all complained about this for years, there has to be some kind of communication, cooperation for all groups, especially at this time and place and walking into 2020, because who knows what's around the corner at this point. It seems like we're all in a holding point. It seems like we're all kind of like overwhelmed with information and absurdities and in a lot of cases fear and misgivings, and we need some kind of direction, and we can form our own direction, but we need to unite and move forward together. Everything affects everything, and if we don't move together as a community, as a city, as a state and a country, then it looks like there's some fairly dark paths ahead.
Well, there's a lot of dystopian, post-apocalyptic information that gets disseminated to people, and I think they have a proclivity to key on that rather than key on the positive nature of how things could be going. As I like to say, it does not have to be this way. We could easily create a dynamic through language and communication that would create an environment of nobody was getting hurt and everybody was having a good time, and corporations could be making even more money than they are now because they'd have a much larger base of consumers. There would be a program to end poverty, which would create more wealth, and that's how I look at it. I think people are doing it backwards. Creating suffering and destruction to create wealth is not really acceptable from my mindset.
Well, it is. It seems to be all about the mindset, and with information, the internet, and all this stuff. I thought at one point that we'd all be able to connect and learn from each other and move forward together. But it seems to there's so many divisions and breaks and propaganda and fear-mongering out there, and a lot of it's still in the hands of a bunch of scared old white men that are pre-programmed from birth for their privilege, and so it seems like the corporations, the banks, the international banks, a lot of these despots around the world are a bunch of primarily brainwashed, programmed, capitalist, corporatist, scared old white people for the most part that are afraid of any type of change, that are addicted to oil and gas and war and power. And what's exciting, what Lloyd was talking about, everybody getting along, having a good time, working together. This could easily change in such a short period of time. If everybody got on the same page, within 2 to 10 years, we could be non-fossil fuel dependent. We could be growing hemp like crazy, solar, wind everywhere. Redistributing our wealth.
Well, we could be creating a lot more wealth. I mean, if these industries like oil and gas and military weapons production and everything, if they were retooled and redesigned to do other more useful things. I mean, they're very powerful, well-organized machines. They're just not creating the kind of products that we need. If they could be, retooled to create products that are of benefit to humanity and mankind in general. And again, it's a two-rule system. Nobody gets hurt. Everybody has a good time.
Well, it's like, taking advantage of local facilities, like I postulated back right after the Occupy movement, what was that, 2012 or so. And it's like, when we're talking about hemp, I guess Kentucky, New Jersey, states like that have fertile topsoil and stuff like that are some of the best places in this country to grow hemp. There's places to grow hemp in New Mexico, but other parts of our land are pretty sparse. We could be putting huge solar farms on there and wind farms and things like that. But one thing I offered, if you severely tone down our military and make public use of something like Sandia Labs, they have the technology and brilliance and degrees there to take hemp from all over the country and develop 100 to 200 different processes of hemp utilization. There's at least 7 different derivations of biodiesel fuel that you can make out of hemp. Hemp powder and capsules are very good for your health. I have hemp powder on my cereal every morning. You can make a hempcrete that's just as strong as concrete. You can make hemp plastic that's biodegradable. You can make straws out of hemp that'll biodegrade. Hemp and bamboo can oxygenate the planet something like 6 to 16 times faster than trees.
Right. I saw a product that is under development. It's a hemp airplane. The fuselage and everything is made completely out of hemp. They say it's 10 times stronger than steel or aluminum.
Yeah, that's crazy. And for hempcrete and hemp houses and stuff like that, I've seen little designs where they build them like domes and stuff like that, incorporating them like in hobbit holes and stuff like that. And the insulation's pretty amazing. I don't know if it's like Adobe, but I know for the integrity that it'll definitely keep heat and cool air inside for a while.
Well, I'm thinking it's probably way superior to Adobe. Adobe is basically dirt and straw.
Yeah, but
over time, it wants to melt.
No, I know, but a nice Adobe house can keep things really cool and can keep and holds heat in, and especially if you had what do you call it? What do I have? I have radiant electric heat in my house, but fortunately, I have 16 solar panels that take care of that electricity. But another cool thing that I've seen in New Mexico with 16 or so earth ships. And if you don't know what earth ships are, they're kind of made out of adobe, and there's stuff packed into them. There's glass bottles, there's recyclable goods, newspapers, all sorts of things that make up the insulation. They have solar panels on the top, and a lot of them have adobe brick or a certain type of brick with water tubes that provide radiant heat in there, and they're so toasty warm and nice and stuff like that. But we have to be conscious of our water as well.
Indeed we do. And so much of what oil and gas does, it's detrimental to the health of our water system. Mm-hmm. Another reason that industry needs to retool itself to create products that are of benefit rather than of harm.
Well, when we talk about oil and gas and plastics, if we skip the process where this horrible grainy burn the pipes out tar sand comes down to Port Arthur in Texas and is put on the Koch brothers and put on super tankers to China after the Koch brothers refineries spit out all the vitamins and other poisons towards southeast Texas and Louisiana. All of a sudden we're in China with these super tankers, and they're burning this stuff freely and without regulation, and can endanger the planet's oxygen system within 16 to 20 years. Let's talk about China itself. I mean, Lloyd has amazed me in the past about telling me about the pollution levels in different towns around China, and you had the river that turned 2 different colors, and that was only one of like 2 or 3 different rivers. And you had the plastic waste and the complete chemical burns and unregulated refineries and stuff like that.
They do have a pollution problem there, and primarily air pollution.
Well, look, us consuming right now. I'm probably speaking into a microphone and looking at a laptop that was made out of those type of plastic processes in China.
That's right. They could easily be made out of hemp.
No, really.
Or hemp derivatives.
Yeah, I like it when, Walmart is trying to boycott certain things like weapons and other things, but, if they really want to, and they're saying, oh, well, we want to be more environmentally friendly. It's like, well, if you were more environmentally friendly, you wouldn't import all these cheap plastics from China.
Yeah, you mentioned the Walmart. They recently stopped selling firearms in their stores, which I thought was interesting. And Dick's Sporting Goods has followed suit. Not only are they ending the sale of assault-style weapons, but they actually, rather than try to return those assault-style weapons to the manufacturer, the ones that they're not going to sell anymore, they destroyed them. The destruction of guns in America. I love that story. I
know. It's sort of like the nuclear bombs. For some reason, even though I had my little foray into the military for a year or so, I've been, ever since I can remember, ever since I was born, I've been deathly opposed to guns and weapons in general. One of my grandfathers decided that I had too many sisters and women in my life at one point, so he decided to send me off to a militaristic summer camp between when I was 7 years old, and I learned how. I became very proficient in all sorts of weapons. And rifles and scoped rifles and archery, this, that, and the other thing. And I'm a very good shot, and that's another reason why I absolutely detest weapons, because if I had one in my hand, I know how to use it, I know how to break it apart, and I know how to hit what I'm aiming at.
I don't know, whenever people want to debate me about guns, I just key on the fact that I want to know from them that the useful purpose of a firearm, like a handgun, having a handgun in your home, how is that useful to you?
I don't know. Your kids could kill themselves. You could kill yourself. I mean, it takes training and responsibility, and this thing should be at least insured like a car.
I would think so. It's odd that people aren't required to have some kind of liability insurance. They operate a motor vehicle, which can be dangerous as well, but they're required to have insurance. But firearms don't seem to garner that. I guess they don't want to burden people with extra costs that they...
Yeah, well, a couple of interesting perks came along with going to a militaristic mountain climbing summer camp in New Hampshire. I got a lifetime subscription to this... I want to talk about male-dominated white privilege type of stuff. This magazine that was sort of like a Boy Scout magazine back there. It was called Boy's Life. And... the propaganda in there was very interesting. The cool thing about it was it ran a series of Robert Heinlein's short story science fiction, which turned me into a science fiction freak way back then. But it advocated guns and use of weapons and things like that. And there was an interesting, I don't know if you want to call it hypocrisy or two things happening at the same time. I also, I guess... My grandfather also made me and him and all sorts of people, the people that he could get a hold of, members of the NRA. And I guess back then the NRA was perceived as, you know about guns, you know how to handle guns, you know how to fire guns, marksmanship and all that and stuff like that. And I canceled my NRA membership about the same time that I canceled my Rolling Stone subscription when I was 19, when the Hustle became the cover issue of Rolling Stone.
The disco era.
Yeah, I was also a member of this group that was called No Handguns New Jersey, and I had bumper stickers like that on my car, so it was quite a juxtaposition at one point to be a member of that group and to be a member of the NRA at the same time. But as we've seen lately, and with the teabaggers and the Second Amendmenters and all these people, and Obama's coming for your guns and all these people, it's that the and the money they make from semi-automatic weapons and arms sales in general, that the NRA has become quite the different organization that your father knew.
Yes, it's taken quite a turn. It's become more of a non-governmental organization rather than a industry organization.
Well, the interesting thing is that all this rambling sort of comes full circle because, well, who's the acting president of the NRA right now? Is it Wayne LaPierre or is it former Lieutenant Oliver North?
I'm not sure. I know some of those people resigned recently.
Well, I know they at least nominated former Lieutenant Oliver North as the president of the NRA, which is very interesting because when we first heard of Oliver North way back, it was just before the election between Carter and Reagan, when Reagan sent a team over to Iraq to talk to President or Premier Bonnie Sauter there to hold the hostages until after the election, and if he did, he'd be promised all sorts of armaments and weaponry and stuff like that. And the money that
that's just wrong.
Yeah, and the money that they came up with this brilliant idea to raise money for all these weapons and weapons transportation, and it was talking to the cartels down in Central America and producing large amounts of cocaine to move into the United States for sale there. The whole thing became, this is one of the reasons why San Francisco journalist Gary Webb was suicided. This is the Iran Contra affair where they were running tons of cocaine into the country and through Mena, Arkansas. Barry Seal and all those people before him, the treetop flyers that were moving it all over the place. And Mena, Arkansas was kind of overlooked by people in Little Rock that happened to be, at that time, Governor Bill Clinton, and the biggest law firm in Little Rock that was aware of a number of real estate events in Mena and surrounding areas was the Rodham law firm. So that's interesting. But there was this I guess, was it the Sandinistas? I don't know. Were they the ones that shot down the Eugene Hassenpfeffer in his cargo plane? And it was shot down over Nicaragua. In any case, I can't remember if it was the Sandinistas or the rebels. But the pictures were taken, and he was taken out, and they found out that he was an operative of the CIA campaign that was going on down there. And the pictures of his broken fuselage revealed tons of bags of cocaine and tons of semi-automatic and automatic weapons. And the person who was in charge of that Central American sphere of operations was a Lieutenant Oliver North, who answered directly to the CIA. And there were very interesting people that are in the White House administration right now that were kind of connected to that. William Barr, our Attorney General, was one of the people that was connected to it. A number of people knew about it. George Herbert Walker Bush, who was Reagan's vice president during that time and shortly after, was kind of the de facto political connection to the CIA probably since 1956, and he knew a lot about this stuff, and some guy named Scooter Libby knew a lot about that stuff. But after Scooter Libby was scapegoated in the Iran Contra affair, the direct connection between Bush and North and Reagan was former director, I always get this wrong, I think he was former director of the CIA and at that time acting director of the FBI. His name was William Casey, who just happened to be in Walter Reed Hospital at that time, mysteriously dying of a brain tumor, who actually did die an hour after George Herbert Walker Bush visited him in Walter Reed. And Scooter Libby was sent to jail, and a lot of the stuff was kind of swept over the table and stuff like that. Gary Webb was murdered. Barry Seal went to jail for life and stuff like that. And then what happened in the early days of Reagan? What happened to all this cocaine? Well, a huge supply of it hit northern LA and parts of California. What was the guy's name? Freeway Billy or Freeway Bobby? I used to think his name was Freeway Johnny, and he actually had later connections to Ron and Nicole, but we'll not get into OJ conspiracies. But anyway, so Freeway Johnny, watered down this stuff, cut this stuff, and people learned how to burn it and make crack cocaine out of that. What was the same thing that was happening with the early Reagan administration, where he shut down the mental institutions and didn't provide proper mental health to returning Vietnam vets and stuff like that? Oh, yeah, they had known for two and a half years that the AIDS epidemic was rapidly spreading across North America, and he essentially allowed 200,000 people to die of AIDS before he made it a public issue.
Well, people in the United States are led to believe that the AIDS issue is kind of, it's on the downturn. But the thing that they fail to understand is that in Africa, more than 100,000 people a year die from AIDS. Many things, they've monetized it. The pharmaceutical companies have turned it into a whole range of products that people can use to prevent HIV, to treat HIV, and we create disasters and then we monetize them. We create poverty, then we monetize it. We create war and then we monetize it. And these are all backwards kinds of things. We should be spending more money on increasing the quality of education and bringing more people up out of poverty to have a more vibrant economy. I mean, it's simply the case that creating more poverty is hurting the economy of the entire world.
And
well, it's not very useful. Anything that's not accessible to the whole of the community is actually hurting part of the community. If it's not helping everyone, it gets back to nobody gets hurt. Everybody has a good time.
But if everybody's needs met and everybody was happy and there would be great natural vibes around the world, when you look back, it just looks so cheap. I mean, it looks like propaganda, con men, criminality.
Always people trying to take advantage of those less fortunate.
Well, I thought at one point, just before this time that we talked about with Reagan and all this swept under the table, and the fact that disco and coke and things seemed to make the 80s a blur at one point before that, and kind of mistakenly, for me, a little bit mistakenly after that, I thought that we had gotten to a point where we were starting to change things for the better. We had a unified vision to go to the moon. We were talking about civil rights, women's rights. It looked like we were actually using our intelligence and moving towards a bigger and brighter future. And then the Clintons, who we were talking about, seemed to make everything happy and upbeat, and we had some kind of economic boom, or at least we balanced our budget and stuff like that. But that was probably due to the techno revolution and not necessarily to Clinton. But I don't know. It seems like as we feel right now. And for opportunity, addressing poverty, all that stuff, it seems like we have been in a holding pattern since Ronald Reagan took office. I mean, our minimum wage, standard of living has really not risen perceptibly since then.
Oh, some people would assert it's declined.
Oh, yeah. And then we're locked into all these incredible debts that we'll never get out of for the rest of our lives.
What's my part of the national debt? A couple of 100,000 now, maybe more, $250,000. Every man, woman, and child owes $250,000. Insane.
Well, it's almost like we never left Georgia. For people that don't know history that well, we weren't, as far as the white people and people who came from Europe, I mean, when we first learned standard Western civilization history, it's like, oh, the Huguenots and these, the Lutherans, these Puritans, Pilgrims, people who were prosecuted for their religious purposes and stuff like that, escaped to the New World, blah blah blah. But there were a lot of people, undesirables dumped here. There were a lot of prisoners. There were a hell of a lot of debtor prisoners dumped in Georgia, in George Oglethorpe's colony. Georgia was named for King George III. It wasn't named for George Oglethorpe, who was the first serious prison warden for white people in the United States. And they did the same thing in Australia in Botany Bay. I mean, Australia and southern America was basically originally populated and eventually taken over control by a lot of criminals and thieves and people like that that were dumped into huge prisons. But you can't really fault those people that well. I mean, that much. I mean, look what was happening in Britain at that time. There was just so many resources and population that could handle people. There weren't enough wars going on. And you had the thing, even with the privileged white males and stuff like that. You had the noble. You had the first son who was going to inherit and all this stuff, and then you had the second son who would join the clergy or this, that, and the other one, and the third son that either went into debt slavery or became a cannon fodder.
The history of America.
But I guess going back to Reagan, I mean, God, it seemed like everything that dude touched fell to pieces. And
he was one of the great destroyers.
Mm-hmm. It seemed like he sucked our vision and cooperation straight out of us. It seemed like I don't know about most people, but it just seemed like the '80s were sort of a blur to me. And I don't know. It just seemed like people had to hunker down and work their asses off just to not get into incredible debt. And now we have all our poor students right now that are in mind-boggling, crippling debt for the rest of their lives, and they can't afford another debt like a mortgage. So everything's changing as far as the housing market and.
Well, the people that develop properties. They're actually, it used to be a subdivision would be built, real estate agents would come in, they'll sell the homes, the mortgage begins, and people go down that road. Now there's whole developments of homes being created. They're all rentals because people can't afford to enter into a mortgage. They don't have the kind of down payment that'll make the monthly mortgage affordable to them. So they're creating entire new housing developments that are all rentals. A lot of the big companies like Broadstone, who's very very prevalent here in Albuquerque with all their projects. They are the world's largest owner of single family homes that are only available for rent. So the industry is changing.
And it was quite messed up by all the factors that led up to the housing crisis and recession from 2008 and on. I used to work for the banks and trying to survive back then as far as securing mortgages and stuff like that. And they were bundled and rebundled. We worked with Countrywide and Greenpoint Credit that I worked with back east was doing no-look mortgages to people and taking people straight from the airports and from the harbors that landed here and giving them non-secured loans in these McMansions and stuff like that. And there's rows and rows of them in New York and Florida right now that nobody can afford and nobody lives in.
Berkshire Hathaway did the same thing with the manufactured houses going into areas around Indian reservations and offering the Native Americans really attractive sounding opportunities to get into a new home, and the entire thing was structured to be a vehicle for repossession and then taking a loss on the repossession and making their money that way, but in the process, basically, damaging the lives of people that had trusted the lender to be working in their best interest. That's one of the problems now with a lot of businesses is you can't rely on them to have the best interest of the consumer at heart. Maybe you never could, but I mean it's very apparent now that a lot of them are not working with the best interest of the community as a whole.
Yeah, that's the argument between capitalists and corporatists. I guess it appears with these new models, conglomerations, monopolies, and so many people controlling certain interests that the individual capitalist isn't really seen or exists anymore, or is protected by so many lawyers that you can't find them, and everything has to do with satisfying the board and the stockholders, and the consumer be damned. When I worked for Greenpoint Credit, I was a collector and a mortgage officer, and we held the mortgages in all Greenpoint's trailers in New Mexico and half of Arizona, half of Colorado, and half of western Texas. And they were doing the same thing there too. I mean, one of the reasons we were working with Countrywide and repackaging these mortgages and selling people out, and we got to the point where as the Indians from India were taking over Greenpoint and moving the headquarters from New York to Los Angeles, there are all these laws being rewritten in Texas and Colorado saying that, if your unit is not at least 3 years old, then you're not only grandfathered out of the mobile home park, but it's your responsibility to move your mobile home. If not, then you have to vacate the premises. So at one point, we were putting there's probably 8 of us working, and we were putting like 3 families out on the street every week, and it just drove me absolutely crazy, and I had to quit working for that company.
Yeah, but thank you for having some ethics. And
well, I turned from a mortgage officer into a repo officer, basically, and I was working with them. They had something like only a 3-month deadline, and I was saying, like, let's get everybody together, let's put side money together, let's have people helping you out, nonprofits, so you can buy your own land to set up your own mobile home park. And by the time we got all that together, they were all out on the street.
That's kind of like when you were working at Citibank and you proposed a educational program to allow new credit card holders the ability to properly manage their credit cards. Didn't they fire you after that meeting?
No. Well, they kept me around for blanks and giggles, but I suggest, I had seen, being a student at UNM a lot, going through the student union and stuff like that, there are always tables outside and inside, like, get your new Citibank credit card, this will pay for this, and this, and I just came up in a board meeting once. I said, I have this great idea. Instead of tables that are actually encouraging reckless spending, we could talk to some of these students about how to manage bank accounts or life affair, and how to pay back the interest on their credit cards to become reliable consumers. And they all looked at me like I was the devil and ready to throw me out the window. But I hung around for a little bit after that. But then after I realized the extent of their usury and insanity, I got the heck out of there.
Well, again, you're listening to ACP, the Activist Community Podcast Network, and I think we're going to end the show for today. Be aware that our second part of the Tom Dent and Charles Arison discussion of civilian police oversight and the Civilian Police Oversight Agency here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. That'll be coming up. And we want to thank everyone very much for listening.